Can carpal tunnel syndrome be service-connected as a secondary condition to a hand or wrist injury that occurred during military service? My name is Dr. David Geier, triple board certified orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine specialist, and anti-aging and regenerative medicine expert. I help veterans by writing Nexus letters that argue that your orthopedic injuries are connected to your military training and service so you can get the compensation you deserve. This video is my latest in a new series of videos I'm making in which I answer service connection questions I receive from military veterans across this country. And this one, very straightforward, basically goes like this. And this is very similar to a lot of secondary injury questions I get. I broke my wrist in basic training. I developed carpal tunnel syndrome that got worse in the years after I left service. Can I argue carpal tunnel syndrome as secondary to my wrist fracture? Okay, it's a very, very good question. Basically, and you may know this, I never know the level that people know when they watch these videos, so if you know a lot of this, I apologize. But to argue a disability claim for carpal tunnel syndrome developing secondary to a service-connected wrist fracture, you've got to basically establish a causal link between the two. Secondary just basically means carpal tunnel was caused by or aggravated by an already service-connected disability, like the wrist fracture. Basically, the VA requires evidence showing that it's at least as likely as not that the fracture led to the carpal tunnel syndrome through mechanisms like altered wrist mechanics, scarring, repetitive stress on the median nerve, that type of thing. And that can help you get compensation for it without having to prove that the military itself caused the carpal tunnel syndrome. First thing you have to do is get the wrist fracture service connected. And usually you need to do that first and then come back and argue for the carpal tunnel as secondary to the wrist later, although it can sometimes be done at the same time. But typically you get the wrist fracture service connected first. What you're going to want to do is show how the fracture occurred during service, training, combat, whatever it was, and it led to residual symptoms, limited motion, chronic pain that can contribute to the carpal tunnel syndrome. Then when we're talking about the carpal tunnel syndrome argument, basically we're looking for a nexus or a connection. Carpal tunnel syndrome usually arises secondary to a wrist injury because the fracture causes inflammation around the nerve, maybe malalignment, maybe nerve compression in the carpal tunnel. You're going to want medical evidence. You're going to want a doctor that's treating you, giving you the diagnosis of carpal tunnel. Usually it's done by nerve conduction studies or EMG tests, but also symptoms like numbness and tingling, weakness, pain in your hand, pain in your fingers, whether that's private doctors or VA medical records that show that. And what you're going to want to see is you didn't have it before the fracture, you get the fracture, and then you started developing carpal tunnel symptoms and the problem, the carpal tunnel syndrome. Then what you're going to need is what's called a Nexus letter from a doctor like me, some kind of specialist, but it is absolutely crucial. In that letter, that doctor is going to explain how medically the fracture can cause or worsen the carpal tunnel syndrome. And you're going to want phrases like more likely than not, or at least as likely as not, showing that after the fracture, you develop scarring, repetitive strain, whatever, that led to the carpal tunnel syndrome. Sometimes lay statements or buddy statements can be helpful, where you write a statement in your own words or your friends or family do, showing how that wrist fracture led to limitations that maybe forced you to use your hand differently. That led to carpal tunnel syndrome, maybe because you had to keep your wrist in a certain way for a long period of time while the fracture healed. It could be any number of things, but that can be helpful as well. Typically, the VA rates carpal tunnel syndrome under a diagnostic code for median nerve paralysis. It can be anywhere from 10% for mild to 70% if it's complete paralysis, especially if it's the dominant hand. You get a 10% boost if it's bilateral. The key is showing medical causation and functional loss, but you're basically building a case. And it really very much relies on your records, and it's going to rely on a Nexus letter arguing that carpal tunnel syndrome developed secondary to the wrist fracture, but absolutely can be done. Now, if you're interested in learning more about the disability claims process, you can get a free copy of an ebook I wrote, The 8 Most Common Reasons the VA Denies Service Connection for Disability Claims and How You Can Beat Them. You can get that absolutely free by clicking the link in the description below this video. You can also learn more about working with me and my team if you're potentially interested in a Nexus letter for your condition. Just scroll further down. You can definitely check more about that out. I try to make the process easy. I try to make it simple for you. And I definitely try to help you the best I can in your disability claim. So click that link, read all about working more with me and my team. I definitely want to give you the best chance of winning your claim. Thank you so much for watching. Again, make sure to subscribe to this channel and click the bell to be notified when I release a new video. But I look forward very much to helping you in the future.